Hi class, welcome back to All Quiet on the Western Front. Today we are going to read chapters 11 and 12 and the little paragraph epilogue at the end. So chapter 10 was a long one and we saw the injury to Paul and Albert Kraft, and then they were at the Catholic hospital recovering. Kraft lost his leg, dealing with depression. We saw just a lot of the life, these short little vignettes of interactions with other people at the hospital. Then at the end, we find out that Paul goes home to finish recovering, and then here we are at chapter 11. So I'm on page 271. We count the weeks no more. It was winter when I came up, and when the shells exploded, the frozen clods of earth were just as dangerous as the fragments. Now the trees are green again. Our life alternates between billets and the front. We have almost grown accustomed to it. War is the cause of death, like cancer and tuberculosis, like influenza and dysentery. The deaths are merely more frequent, more varied, and terrible. Our thoughts are clay. They are molded with the changes of the days. When we are resting, they are good. Under fire, they are dead. Fields of craters within and without. Everyone is so, not only ourselves here, the things that existed before are no longer valid, and one practically knows them no more. Distinctions, breeding, education are changed, are almost blotted out and hardly recognizable anymore. Sometimes they give an advantage for profiting by a situation, but they also bring consequences along with them, in that they arouse prejudices which have to be overcome. It is as though formerly we were coins of different provinces, and now we are melted down and all bearing the same stamp. To rediscover the old distinctions, the metal itself must be tested. First we are soldiers, and afterwards, in a strange and shamefaced fashion, individual men as well. It is a great brotherhood which adds something of the good fellowship of the folk song, of the feeling of solidarity of convicts, and of the desperate loyalty to one another of men condemned to death, to a condition of life arising out of the midst of danger, out of the tension and forlornness of death, seeking in a wholly unpathetic way a fleeting enjoyment of the hours as they come. If one wants to appraise it, it is at once heroic and banal. But who wants to do that? So he's getting really deep here, just pondering life, what soldiers have become. He says in that previous paragraph, he uses the metaphor. We used to be like all coins from different countries, but this war has melted us all down and stamped us with the same stamp. Um, and that stamp being the lost generation, right? A ruined life. And then he talks about the brotherhood, again, that comradeship. Death is coming at any moment, so with their brothers at arms, they're going to find the last little enjoyment they can together. It is this, for example, that makes Jadin spoon down his ham and pea soup in such tearing haste when an enemy attack is reported, simply because he cannot be sure that in an hour's time he will be alive. We have discussed it at length, whether it is right or not to do so. Cat condemns it because he says a man has to reckon with the possibility of an abdominal wound, and that is more dangerous on a full stomach than on an empty one. Such things are real problems. They are serious matters to us. They cannot be otherwise. Here, on the borders of death, life follows an amazingly simple course. It is limited to what is most necessary. All else lies buried in gloomy sleep. In that, besides our primitiveness and our survival, were we more subtly differentiated, we must long since have gone mad, have deserted, or have fallen. As in a polar expedition, every expression of life must serve only the preservation of existence, and is absolutely focused on that. All else is banished because it would consume energies unnecessarily. That is the only way to save ourselves. In the quiet hours, when the puzzling reflection of former days, like a blurred mirror, projects beyond me the figure of my present existence, I often sit over against myself as before a stranger and wonder how the unnamable active principle that calls itself to life has adapted itself even to this form. All other expressions lie in a winter sleep. Life is simply one continual watch against the menace of death. It has transformed us into unthinking animals in order to give us the weapon of instinct. It has reinforced us with dullness so that we do not go to pieces before the horror, which would overwhelm us if we had clear conscious thought. It has awakened in us the sense of comradeship so that we escape the abyss of solitude. It has lent us the indifference of wild creatures so that in spite of it all, we perceive the positive in every moment and store it up as a reserve against the onslaught of nothingness. Thus we live in a closed, hard existence of the utmost superficiality, and rarely does an incident strike out a spark, but then unexpectedly a flame of grievous and terrible yearning flares up, and these are dangerous moments. Again, he's saying that to survive this war, we have to become animals. We have to become these beasts. We have to just not think. But there's moments, he says, when this terrible yearning or this longing flares up, starting to think. And he says these are dangerous moments. They show us that the adjustment is only artificial, that it is not simple rest, but sharpest struggle for rest. In the outward form of our life, we are hardly distinguishable from bushmen. But whereas the latter can be so always, because they are so truly, and at best may develop further by exertion of their spiritual forces, with us it is the reverse. Our inner forces are not exerted toward regeneration, but toward degeneration. The bushmen are primitive and naturally so, but we are primitive in an artificial sense, and by virtue of the utmost effort. And at night, waking out of a dream, overwhelmed and bewitched by the crowding apparitions or appearances, a man perceives with alarm how slight is the support, how thin the boundary that divides him from the darkness. We are little flames, poorly sheltered by frail walls against the storm of dissolution and madness, in which we flicker and sometimes almost go out. Then the muffled roar of the battle becomes a ring that encircles us. We creep in upon ourselves, and with big eyes stare into the night. Our only comfort is the steady breathing of our comrades asleep, and thus we wait for the morning. So this really deep metaphor, he says we're just these little flames, and there's just these frail, thin walls separating us from this brutal, awful storm. And we're flickering and we're sputtering, and our only comfort is our fellow comrade sleeping nearby. Every day and every hour, every shell and every death cuts into this thin support, and the years waste it rapidly. I see how it is already gradually breaking down around me. There is the mad story of Dietering. He was one of those who kept himself to himself. His misfortune was that he saw a cherry tree in a garden. We were just coming back from the front line, and at a turning of the road near our billet, marvelous in the morning twilight, stood this cherry tree before us. It had no leaves, but was one white mass of blossom. In the evening, Dietering was not to be seen. Then at last he came back and had a couple of branches of cherry blossom in his hand. We made fun of him and asked whether he was going to wedding. He made no answer, but lay down on his bed. During the night, I heard him making a noise. He seemed to be packing. I sensed something amiss and went over to him. He made out that it was nothing, and I said to him, "Don't do anything silly, Dietering." "Oh, why, it's merely that I can't sleep." "What did you pick the cherry branches for?" "Well, surely I can pick cherry blossom if I want to," he replied evasively. And after a while, "I have a big orchard with cherry trees at home. When they are in blossom, from the hayloft they look just like one single sheet, so white. It is just the time. Perhaps you will get leave soon. You may even be sent back as a farmer." He nodded, but he was far away. When these peasants are excited, they have a curious expression, a mixture of cow and yearning God, half stupid and half rapt. In order to turn him away from his thoughts, I asked him for a piece of bread. He gave it to me without a murmur. That was suspicious, for he's usually tight-fisted, so I stayed awake. Nothing happened. In the morning, he was as usual. Apparently, he had noticed that I had been watching him, but the second morning he was gone. I noticed it, but said nothing in order to give him time. He might perhaps get through. Various fellows have already got into Holland. But at roll call, he was missed. A week after, we heard that he had been caught by the field gendarmes, those despicable military police. He had headed toward Germany. That was hopeless, of course. And of course, he did everything else just as idiotically. Anyone might have known that his flight was only homesickness and a momentary aberration. But what does a court-martial 100 miles behind the front line know about it? We've heard nothing more of Dietering. So he deserts, and all throughout history, even now, and even in this book, the punishment for desertion, that's death. Okay, so we're given the indication that the court-martial will sentence Dietering to death for deserting. But sometimes it broke out in other ways, this danger, these pent-up things, as from an overheated boiler. It will be enough to tell how Berger met his end. Our trenches have now for some time been shot to pieces, and we have an elastic line so that there's practically no longer any proper trench warfare. So elastic means it's movable. So their trenches are so destroyed that they're just taking cover wherever they can. When attack and counterattack have waged backwards and forwards, there remains a broken line and a bitter struggle from crater to crater. The front line has been penetrated, and everywhere small groups have established themselves. The fight is carried on from clusters of shell holes. We are in a crater. The English are coming down obliquely. They are so from the side, your obliques, your side. They are turning our flank and working in behind us. We are surrounded. It is not easy to surrender. Fog and smoke hang over us. No one would recognize that we wanted to give ourselves up, and perhaps we don't want to. A man doesn't even know himself at such moments. We hear the explosions of the hand grenades coming toward us. Our machine gun sweeps over the semicircle in front of us. The cooling water evaporates. We hastily pass around the case, and every man pisses in it, and thus we again have water and are able to continue firing. But behind us, the attack crashes ever nearer. A few minutes, and we are lost. Then, at closest range, a second machine gun bursts out. It is set up in a crater alongside us. Berger has fetched it, and now the counterattack comes over from behind. We are set free and make contact with the rear. Afterwards, as we lie in comparatively good cover, one of the food carriers reports that a couple of 100 yards distant there lies a wounded messenger dog. Where? Asks Berger. The other describes the place to him. Berger goes off either to fetch the beast in or to shoot it. 6 months ago, he would not have cared. He would have been reasonable. Why try to prevent him? Then, as he goes off grimly, all we can say is, "You're mad," and we let him go. For these cases of frontline madness become dangerous if one is not able to fling the man to the ground and hold him fast, and Berger is 6 feet and the most powerful man in the company. He is absolutely mad, for he has to pass through the barrage, but this lightning that lowers somewhere above us has struck him and made him demented. It affects others as so that they begin to rave, to run away. There was one man who even tried to dig himself into the ground with hands, feet, and teeth. It is true, such things are often simulated, but the pretense itself is a symptom. Berger, who means to finish off the dog, is carried away with a wound in the pelvis, and one of the fellows who carry him gets a bullet in the leg while doing it. So a lot of madness going on. Like people, they're going crazy. The stress and the trauma of what they're experiencing. Mueller is dead. Someone shot him point blank in the stomach with a very light. He lived for half an hour, quite conscious and in terrible pain. Before he died, he handed over his pocketbook to me and bequeathed me his boots, the same that he once inherited from Kemmerich. I wear them, for they fit me quite well. After me, Jaden will get them. I have promised them to him. The only way Jaden's going to get them is if Paul dies. So it's as if Paul's just accepted the fact that eventually I'll be gone, and then he's already determined who's going to get them after him. We've been able to bury Mueller, but he is not likely to remain long undisturbed. Our lines are falling back. There are too many fresh English and American regiments over there. There's too much corned beef and white wheaten bread, too many new guns, too many airplanes. But we are emaciated and starved. Our food is bad and mixed up with so much substitute stuff that it makes us ill. The factory owners in Germany have grown wealthy. Dysentery dissolves our bowels. The latrine poles are always densely crowded. The people at home ought to be shown these gray, yellow, miserable, wasted faces here, these bent figures from whose bodies the colic wrings out the blood, and who, with lips trembling with distorted with pain, grin at one another and say, "Not much sense pulling up one's trousers again." Our artillery is fired out. It has too few shells, and the barrels are so worn that they shoot uncertainly and scatter so widely as even to fall on ourselves. We have too few horses. Our fresh troops are anemic boys in need of rest who cannot carry a pack but merely know how to die. By thousands. They understand nothing about warfare. They simply go on and let themselves be shot down. A single flyer routed 2 companies of them for a joke, just as they came fresh from the train, before they even had heard of such a thing as cover. Germany ought to be empty soon, says Kat. So we're seeing here just how dire the situation is for Germany. They're on their last leg at this point in the war. The English and now the Americans were mentioned. The Americans have joined. So we know we're in the final months of the war, and things are just very, very bleak for the Germans. We've given up hope that someday an end may come. We never think so far. A man can stop a bullet and be killed. He can get wounded, and then the hospital is his next stop. There, if they do not amputate him, or sooner or later falls into the hands of one of those staff surgeons who, with the War Service Cross in his buttonhole, says to him, "What, one leg a bit short? If you have any pluck, you don't need to run at the front. The man is A1, dismissed." Kat tells a story that has traveled the whole length of the front from the Vosges to Flanders, of the staff surgeon who reads the names on the list, and when a man comes up before him, without even looking up, says, "A1, we need soldiers up there." A fellow with a wooden leg comes up before him. The staff surgeon says, "A1." And then, Kat raises his voice, the fellow says to him, "I already have a wooden leg, but when I go back again and they shoot off my head, then I will get a wooden head made and become a staff surgeon." The answer tickled us all immensely. There may be good doctors, and there are, lots of them. All the same, every soldier sometime during his hundreds of inspections falls into the clutches of one of these countless hero grabbers who pride themselves on changing as many C3s and B3s as possible into A1s. There are many such stories. They are mostly far more bitter. All the same, they have nothing to do with mutiny or lead swinging. They're merely honest and call a thing by its name. For there's a great deal of fraud, injustice, and baseness in the army. It is nothing that regiment after regiment returns again and again to the ever more hopeless struggle, that attack follows attack along the weakening, retreating, crumbling line. From a mockery, the tanks have become a terrible weapon. Armored, they come rolling on in long lines, more than anything else, embody for us the horrors of war. So the tanks are the most terrible thing now that they're seeing. And that earlier statement in that previous paragraph is really important. He says we're not trying to cause mutiny by having these stories. We're just trying to say it how it is. There's so much fraud and so much injustice and baseness, which is just like evilness in the army. We do not see the guns that bombard us. The attacking lines of the enemy infantry are men like ourselves, but these tanks are machines. Their caterpillars run on as endless as the war. They are annihilation. They roll without feeling into the craters and climb up again without stopping. A fleet of roaring, smoke-belching armor-clads, invulnerable steel beasts squashing the dead and the wounded. We shrivel up in our thin skin before them. Against their colossal weight, our arms are sticks of straw and our hand grenades matches. So the personification there of these tanks, they're just these evil, like living, monstrous creatures rolling across the land. Shells, gas clouds, and flotillas of tanks, shattering, corroding death. Dysentery, influenza, typhus, scalding, choking death. Trenches, hospitals, the common grave. There are no other possibilities. So that's where they're going to end up. They're dead in the trenches, they're suffering in a hospital, or just the common grave. No man's land or the trenches. In one attack, our company commander, Bertink, falls. He was one of those superb frontline officers who are foremost in every hot place. He was with us for 2 years without being wounded, so that something had to happen in the end. We occupy a crater and get surrounded. The stink of petroleum or oil blows across from the fumes of powder. 2 fellows with a flamethrower are seen. One carries the tin on his back. The other has the hose in his hands from which the fire spouts. If they get so near that they can reach us, we are done for we cannot retreat yet. We open fire on them, but they work nearer and things begin to look bad. Bertink is lying in the hole with us. When he sees that we cannot hit them because under the sharp fire we have to think too much about keeping under cover, he takes a rifle, crawls out of the hole, and lying down, propped on his elbows, he takes aim. He fires. At the same moment, a bullet smacks into him. They've got him. Still he lies and aims again. Once he shifts and again takes aim. At last the rifle cracks. Vertink lets the gun drop and says, "Good," and slips back into the hole. The hindermost of the two flamethrowers is hit. He falls. The hose slips away from the other fellow. The fire squirts about on all sides, and the man burns. Vertink has a chest wound. After a while, a fragment smashes away his chin, and the same fragment has sufficient force to tear open Lear's hip. Lear groans as he supports himself. Sorry about that, class. Lear groans as he supports himself on his arm. He bleeds quickly. No one can help him. Like an emptying tube, after a couple of minutes, he collapses. What use is it to him now that he was such a good mathematician at school? So now another one of Paul's comrades is gone. Lear dies. And he makes that comment, who cares? All that knowledge he learned. What help is it to him now? Wasted life. The months pass by. The summer of 1918 is the most bloody and the most terrible. The days stand like angels in blue and gold, incomprehensible above the ring of annihilation. So we're getting close to the end. It's the summer of 1918. The war will end in November 11th, 1918. Every man here knows that we are losing the war. Not much is said about it. We are falling back. We will not be able to attack again after this big offensive. We have no more men and no more ammunition. Still, the campaign goes on. The dying goes on. Summer of 1918. Never has life, in its niggardliness, seemed to us so desirable as now. The red poppies in the meadows around our billets, the smooth beetles on the blades of grass, the warm evenings in the cool, dim rooms, the black, mysterious trees of the twilight, the stars and the flowing waters, dreams and long sleep. Oh, life, life, life. Summer of 1918. Never was so much silently suffered as in the moment when we depart once again for the front line. Wild, tormenting rumors of an armistice and peace are in the air. They lay hold on our hearts and make the return to the front harder than ever. Summer of 1918. Never was life in the line more bitter and full of horror than in the hours of the bombardment, when the blanched faces lie in the dirt and the hands clutch at the one thought, no, no, not now, not at the last moment. Summer of 1918. Breath of hope that sweeps over the scorched fields, raging fever of impatience, of disappointment, of the most agonizing terror of death, incessant question, why? Why do they make an end? Why do these rumors of an end fly about? So flip back that page. We have repetition there. Summer of 1918. Repetition at the start of a phrase. Remember, that's called a nephra. Okay. And then we get an apostrophe at the end of that first paragraph of the summer of 1918. Oh, life, life, life. Remember, apostrophes were addressing something that can't talk back. So life here is what he's talking to. And they're a sign of distress, okay? They're a sign of a mental struggle. And here at the bitter end, they want life now. They don't want to die. They don't want to be lost. They want to live. And all of a sudden, things, even the smoothness of a beetle in the starry sky, seem more precious to them. There are so many airmen here, and they are so sure of themselves that they give chase to single individuals just as though they were hares. So we have airplanes. And when people are walking on the ground, the airplanes are flying in the sky trying to shoot them. For every one German plane, there come at least 5 English and American. For one hungry, wretched German soldier come 5 of the enemy, fresh and fit. For one German army loaf, there are 50 tins of canned beef over there. We are not beaten, for as soldiers we are better and more experienced. We're simply crushed and driven back by overwhelming superior forces. Behind us lay rainy weeks, gray sky, gray fluid earth, gray dying. If we go out, the rain at once soaks through our overcoats and clothing, and we remain wet all the time, and we are in the line. We never get dry. Those who will wear high boots tie sandbags around the top so that the mud does not pour in so fast. The rifles are cakes, the uniforms caked, everything is fluid and dissolved, the earth one dripping, soaked, oily mass in which lie yellow pools with red spiral streams of blood, and into which the dead, wounded survivors into which the dead, wounded, and survivors slowly sink down. Remember the poem we read, The Song of the Mud? That was an image a lot of you mentioned as sticking out to you, the people just being sucked down into the mud. Um, so some connections there. The storm lashes us. Out of the confusion of gray and yellow, the hail of splinters whips forth. The childlike cries of the wounded, and in the night, shattered life groans painfully into silence. Our hands are earth, our bodies clay, and our eyes pools of rain. We do not know whether we still live. Then the heat sinks heavily into our shell holes like a jellyfish, moist and oppressive, and on one of these late summer days, while bringing food, Cat falls. We two are alone. I bind up his wound. His shin seems to be smashed. It has got the bone, and Cat groans desperately. At last, just at the last. I comfort him. Who knows how long this mess will go on yet? Now you are saved. Saved because he can go home now from this injury. The wound begins to bleed fast. Cat cannot be left by himself while I try to find a stretcher. Anyway, I don't know of a stretcher bearer's post in the neighborhood. Cat is not very heavy, so I take him up on my back and start off to the dressing station with him. Twice we rest. He suffers acutely on the way. We do not speak much. I have opened the collar of my tunic and breathe heavily. I sweat and my face is swollen with the strain of carrying. All the same, I urge him to let us go on, for the place is dangerous. Shall we go on again, Cat? Must, Paul. Then come. I raise him up. He stands on the uninjured leg and supports himself against a tree. I take up the wounded leg carefully. Then he gives a jump, and I take the knee of the sound leg also under my arm. The going is more difficult. Often a shell whistles across. I go as quickly as I can, for the blood from Cat's wound drips to the ground. We cannot shelter ourselves properly for the explosions. Before we can take cover, the danger is all over. We lie down in a small hole to wait till the shelling is over. I give Cat some tea from my water bottle. We smoke a cigarette. Well, Cat, I say gloomily, we're going to be separated at last. He is silent and looks at me. Do you remember, Cat, how we commandeered the goose, and how you brought me out of the barrage when I was still a young recruit and was wounded for the first time? I cried then. Cat, that is almost 3 years ago. He nods. The anguish of solitude rises up in me. When Cat is taken away, I will have not one friend left. Cat, in any case, we must see one another again, if it is peacetime before you come back. Do you think that I will be marked A1 again with this leg? He asks bitterly. With rest, it will get better. The joint is quite sound. It may get all right again. Give me another cigarette, he says. Perhaps we could do something together later on, Cat. I am very miserable. It is impossible that Cat, my friend, Cat with the drooping shoulders and the poor, thin mustache, Cat whom I know as I know no other man, Cat with whom I have shared these years. It is impossible that perhaps I shall not see Cat again. In any case, give me your address at home, Cat, and here is mine. I will write it down for you. I write his address in my pocketbook. How forlorn I am already, though he still sits here beside me. Couldn't I shoot myself quickly in the foot so as to be able to go with him? Suddenly Cat gurgles and turns green and yellow. Let us go on, he stammers. I jump up, eager to help him. I take him up and start off at a run, a slow, steady pace so as not to jolt his leg too much. My throat is parched. Everything dances red and black before my eyes. I stagger on doggedly and pitilessly, and as at last we reach the dressing station. There I drop to my knees, but have still enough strength to fall on the side where Cat's sound leg is. After a few minutes, I straighten myself up again. My legs and my hands tremble. I have trouble in finding my water bottle to take a pull. My lips tremble as I try to think, but I smile. Cat is saved. After a while, I begin to sort out the confusion of voices that fall on my ears. You might have spared yourself that, says an orderly. I looked at him without comprehending. He points to Cat. He's stone dead. I do not understand him. He's been hit in the shin, I say. The orderly stands still. That as well. I turn around. My eyes are still dulled. The sweat breaks out on me again. It runs over my eyelids. I wipe it away and peer at Cat. He lies still. Fainted, I say quickly. The orderly whistles softly. I know better than that. He is dead. I'll lay my money on that. I shake my head. Not possible. Only 10 minutes ago I was talking to him. He has fainted. Cat's hands are warm. I pass my hand under his shoulders in order to rub his temples with some tea. I feel my fingers become moist. As I draw them away from behind his head, they are bloody. You see? The orderly whistles once more through his teeth. On the way, without having noticed it, Cat has caught a splinter in the head. There's just one little hole. It must have been a very tiny stray splinter, but it has sufficed. Cat is dead. Slowly I get up. Would you like to take his paybook and his things? The lance corporal asks me. I nod and he gives them to me. The orderly is mystified. You're not related, are you? No, we are not related. No, we are not related. Do I walk? Have I feet still? I raise my eyes. I let them move around and turn myself with them. One circle, and I stand in the midst. All is as usual, only the militiaman Stanislaus Kaczynski has died, and then I know nothing more. So at the end there, he faints and passes out. The orderly doesn't understand Paul's distress, his shock. He's like, you're not related, are you? So this hospital worker, he has no idea what kind of relationships these men form when they're at the lines, and he can't understand Paul's reaction. But we know earlier in the book, it said they're closer than lovers. That bond that you form, they are your family. And Paul just lost the last one that he had. So chapter 12, it is autumn. We're getting really close to the end of the war now. Remember, November, the war ends. It's autumn now, so it's probably like October. There are not many of the old hands left. I am the last of the 7 fellows from our class. Everyone talks of peace and armistice. All wait. If it again proves an illusion, then they will break up. Hope is high. It cannot be taken away again without an upheaval. If there is not peace, then there will be revolution. I have 14 days rest because I have swallowed a bit of gas. In the little garden, I sit the whole day long in the sun. The armistice is coming soon. I believe it now too. Then we will go home. Here my thoughts stop and will not go any farther. All that meets me, all that floods over me are but feelings. Greed of life, love of home, yearning for the blood, intoxication of deliverance, but no aims. So no aims, no dreams, no goals for life. Had we returned home in 1916 out of the suffering and the strength of our experience, we might have unleashed a storm. Now if we go back, we will be weary, broken, burnt out, rootless, and without hope. We will not be able to find our way anymore. And men will not understand us. For the generation that grew up before us, though it has passed these years with us already, had a home and a calling. Now it will return to its old occupations and the war will be forgotten. And the generation that has grown up after us will be strange to us and push us aside. We will be superfluous, even to ourselves. Superfluous means extra. We will grow older. A few will adapt themselves. Some others will merely submit, and most will be bewildered. The years will pass by, and in the end, we shall fall into ruin. But perhaps all this that I think is mere melancholy and dismay, which will fly away as the dust when I stand once again beneath the poplars and listen to the rustling of their leaves. It cannot be that it has gone, the yearning that made our blood unquiet, the unknown, the perplexing, the oncoming things, the thousand faces of the future, the melodies from dreams and from books, the whispers and divinations of women. It cannot be that this has vanished in bombardment, in despair, in brothels. Here the trees show gay and golden, the berries of the rowan stand red among the leaves, country roads run white out to the skyline, and the canteens hum like beehives with rumors of peace. I stand up. I am very quiet. Let the months and years come. They can take nothing from me. They can take nothing more. I am so alone and so without hope that I can confront them without fear. The life that has borne me through these years is still in my hands and my eyes. Whether I have subdued it, I know not. But so long as it is there, it will seek its own way out, heedless of the will that is within me. So he says, this future that I have, come what may, there's nothing that it can take because there's nothing that's left. Very, very depressing ending to chapter 12. And then we have, if you turn the page, if you turn the page, we have a short little epilogue that ends the book. He fell in October 1918 on a day that was so quiet and still on the whole front that the Army report confined itself to the single sentence, "All quiet on the Western Front." He had fallen forward and lay on the earth as though sleeping. Turning him over, one saw that he could not have suffered long. His face had an expression of calm, as though almost glad the end had come. So Paul dies. October, just before the armistice, the peace treaty will be signed in November. And it was a quiet day. It was not a day of fighting. Perhaps a sniper picked him off. He fell down, face forward, and his face was calm, as if almost glad. And we can understand that when we look back. Everyone else is gone. He has no future. He has no hope. So that's where we get the title, right? That was the Army report on the day he died. All quiet on the Western Front. Very depressing ending, but in order for Remarque to get the message he wanted to across, it's the way that it had to end. Because this is not a hopeful, encouraging book. It is a sad, depressing book to show what so many people experienced in World War I. And may we not forget what war does to human beings and what it does to people. All right, thanks for joining me for the ending of the book.